Wyoming Territory, November 1882. The wind cut like a blade as the stagecoach doors creaked open on the edge of Elk Hollow, just a cluster of buildings scattered beneath the white-tipped Absaroka Mountains. The sun hung low behind thick clouds, and the snow blew in sideways, stinging bare skin. Cassidy Jane Hollis stepped down onto the frozen ground, her gloved fingers clutching the carpetbag with everything she owned. Her cheeks were flushed raw from the cold, and her dark hair was pinned neatly beneath a bonnet already dusted with snow. She looked left, then right, then again. No one was there. She was supposed to meet the man she had agreed to marry, a widower rancher named Frank who had written kind letters and promised her a warm home and a new start. He had described himself as gentle, hardworking, and ready to love again, but the street was nearly empty. A few men shuffled from the saloon across the road, barely giving her a glance. A dog barked somewhere behind the smithy. Her heart pounded high in her chest. An older woman in a shawl passed, paused, then said gently, "You the mail-order bride for Frank Harrow?" Cassidy nodded, voice lost in her throat. The woman frowned. "He left last week. Packed up, said he was heading east, took his boy with him." Cassidy blinked. "He left? I am sorry, dear." "Guess he changed his mind." The carpetbag slipped from her fingers and hit the snow with a soft thud. The cold crept up her toes, through her boots. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. She could not speak. Tears welled up before she could stop them, hot on her frozen cheeks. She had sold everything to come here. Every coin she had saved from working long nights in a sewing factory in St. Louis. She had nothing now, no place to go, no one. Cassidy walked away from the street, away from the curious eyes and the whispers. The wind howled around her, snow blowing hard. She reached the edge of the town where the fields began and the pines stood thick and dark. She collapsed onto a fallen log, clutching her coat closed, gasping for breath. The tears came fast now. Her shoulders shook. Her lips trembled. She was alone, abandoned, and it was so very cold. A horse's hooves crunched through the snow behind her, slow and steady. She did not turn. She did not care. Let them see her. Let them laugh, but a voice, low and even, spoke behind her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Cassidy raised her head slowly. A man sat atop a chestnut gelding, wrapped in a heavy coat, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. His face was shadowed by the late afternoon light, but his voice carried concern, not curiosity. She started, but the words broke. He dismounted quickly, boots hitting the snow. He moved to her side, crouched, his gloved hand hovering near her shoulder. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "No, just he did not come." The man frowned. "Who did not?" "Frank Harrow. I was supposed to marry him." Her voice cracked. "He is gone." The man's eyes darkened. "You the mail-order bride from Missouri?" She nodded. He looked at her for a long second, then reached down and picked up her bag. "Come with me. You cannot stay out here. I do not know your name." "Colter Vaughn," he said simply. "I have a cabin a few miles west. Warm fire." "You will not be alone tonight." Cassidy stared. "I cannot impose. You are not. It is too cold for pride, and too dangerous for a woman on her own." He extended his hand. She looked down at it, then up into his face. He had strong features, a square jaw, a scar along his temple like someone had once fought him hard. He looked like a man who had seen hard years, but never lost his sense of right. Cassidy took his hand. He helped her up and boosted her gently onto the horse's back, then climbed up behind her, careful not to crowd her. She felt his coat against her back, the warmth of his body already driving the chill from her bones. The horse moved forward at a steady pace. They rode in silence through snow-covered pines, the sky turning lavender as dusk crept over the land. The trail narrowed, winding between trees and over a frozen creek. At last, A small log cabin came into view, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing faintly. Colter dismounted and helped her down. "Go on in. Door is unlocked." Cassidy opened the door and stepped inside. It smelled of pine and wood smoke. A fire crackled in the hearth. The room was simple, one large space with a table, 2 chairs, a bed against the far wall, and shelves lined with books and tools. Colter entered behind her, setting her bag by the door and removing his coat. She turned toward him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice soft. He met her eyes. "Because no one deserves to be left crying in the cold." She swallowed hard. "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "You are welcome to stay here, safe, as long as you need." Cassidy hesitated, then sat down near the fire, warming her hands. He moved around the space with quiet ease, putting a kettle on, setting out a plate of biscuits and dried apples. He poured 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. "It is not much, but it is hot." She took it. "It is more than I had this morning." They sat in silence for a while. The fire popped. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, it was warm and still. Her eyes drifted over him, his rough hands, the way he moved, solid and steady. He was not the man she came to marry, but something about him settled the ache in her chest. "I do not know what comes next," she said finally. Colter looked at her. "Maybe you do not have to know yet. Maybe right now it is just about being warm, being safe." She nodded slowly. "I will sleep on the floor," he said, grabbing a folded wool blanket. "You take the bed." "No," she said quickly. "That is yours. I have slept rougher," he said. "You need it more." She looked at him with wide, tired eyes. "You are kind," he shrugged. "I do not know about that. I just do not like seeing good people left out in the cold." Cassidy did not argue. She lay down on the bed, pulling the quilt over her. Her heart still ached, but the fear had eased, just a little. And somewhere deep inside, a tiny flicker of hope warmed her chest. Colter settled near the fire, one arm folded beneath his head, his eyes watching the flame. In the stillness of that night, with snow falling heavy outside and a quiet man beside her, Cassidy began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was not the end of her story. Maybe it was the beginning. Cassidy woke to the scent of damp earth and something frying in a skillet. Pale light filtered through the frost-glazed window, soft and gray with morning. She sat up slowly, the quilt slipping from her shoulders, and caught sight of Colter crouched by the hearth. He was turning something over in the pan with a fork, his movements quiet and focused. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Coffee's hot. I found a few hen eggs behind the shed. Figured you'd want something warm to start the day." Cassidy rubbed her eyes, the sleep still clinging to her limbs. The bed had been firm but clean, and she had slept without waking once, a surprise after the day before. She stood and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before stepping nearer. "You keep hens?" she asked, her voice rough from sleep. "Not mine," he said. "Belong to a neighbor. He passed in the spring. I've been keeping them fed since. Figured someone ought to." She nodded and took the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it steadied her. He handed her a plate with eggs and a heel of bread, then sat on the floor across from her, legs stretched out near the fire. They ate without much sound, just the low crackle of burning logs and the wind brushing against the walls. After a moment, she asked, "Do you live out here alone?" Colter took a sip from his cup before answering. "I used to ride for a cattle outfit south of here. Broke horses, ran fence, took a bullet once over a line dispute. After that, I came north. Bought this land with what I'd saved and built the place up slow. Been on my own a while." Cassidy picked at the edge of her bread. "You don't mind the quiet?" He looked toward the window. "Quiet don't bother me. I'd rather hear the pines than a man's lies." She watched him a long moment. "You knew Frank, didn't you?" He didn't look away. "Some. Saw him around town. He'd been drinking more than usual since early fall. I didn't expect him to leave, but I can't say I'm surprised. Cassidy set her plate down. He never even wrote to say he'd changed his mind. Colter's jaw tightened slightly. Some men don't think they owe that. They're wrong. She folded her hands in her lap. The fire warmed her face, but her chest still held the weight of being discarded. She didn't cry. There was no room left for that. I can't stay here forever, she said quietly. No, Colter agreed. But you don't have to rush off into a storm without knowing where you're heading. She looked at the cabin walls, the shelves with tools and books, the saddle hanging in the corner. It was a working man's home, carefully kept. If there had ever been a woman in it, there was no sign now. I've worked before, she said. Sewing mostly. I could find a place in town, maybe. Maybe, he said. But there's not much honest work for a woman out here unless she's got someone standing beside her. Town's not cruel, but it's not forgiving either. She met his gaze. Then what do you suggest? He paused, then answered. I've got a second room framed out in the back. Meant to make it a storage loft, but it could be yours. If you wanted to stay through winter, work some, trade for your keep. Cassidy looked down at her hands. You don't even know me. I know you didn't run, he said. You stood out there in the cold and didn't turn back. That says enough. She let the words settle. They didn't make her throat tighten like kindness usually did. They sat low and steady. All right, she said. Just for the winter. Colter gave a single nod, then stood and pulled on his coat. I'll check the traps before the snow gets deeper. There's a pile of wood behind the door if the fire needs feeding. Cassidy watched him leave, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. She listened to his steps fading into the snow. She moved to the basin and washed her face with water so cold it made her gasp. Then she rolled up her sleeves and began clearing the plates. The wind pressed against the walls again, but inside, there was work to be done, and warmth waiting in the hearth. There was no place for sorrow now, only forward. And though she didn't know it yet, the man who had found her in the snow would not always be a stranger. By the second week, Cassidy stood beside Colter in the lean-to, sleeves rolled above her elbows, twisting water from a wet hide. Her fingers ached from the cold, but she didn't slow. He'd been showing her the work piece by piece, tanning, mending tack, checking the line fence where elk sometimes broke through. She hadn't asked for instruction, but he gave it without making her feel small, and she took to it with quiet resolve. That morning the sky held a strange copper hue, the kind that made animals restless. Snow clung to the branches, but the wind had stilled, and the air smelled faintly of iron. You ever see a mountain lion? She asked, dragging the hide onto the beam for scraping. Colter looked up from where he was oiling a saddle girth. Once. North slope past the canyon, big as a mule, it saw me before I saw it. What did you do? Didn't move. Let it know I wasn't meat. It left. She shook her head. I can't tell if that's bravery or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing. Cassidy laughed, the sound rough but honest. Her hands paused on the beam. I used to imagine the West was all yellow fields and blue skies. I didn't think about how much blood soaks into this land. He didn't answer right away. The only sound was the rasp of leather against cloth. Most folks don't, he said. They come for a fresh start and find ghosts waiting for them. She turned toward him. Is that what brought you here? A ghost. His eyes didn't flinch. A brother. He died in Kansas during a raid. Army called it a mistake. I called it enough reason to leave. Cassidy let the words settle. She didn't offer comfort. He didn't look like he wanted it. They worked in silence until the sun dipped behind the hills. That night, she stitched a tear in his coat beside the fire while he carved a length of pine for a new latch. You should start sleeping in the loft, he said without looking up. It's closed in now, warmer than the floor. She glanced toward the ladder. You trust me not to steal your rifle in the night. If you were going to, you'd have done it already. She threaded the needle again. I'll move up tomorrow. He nodded once and kept carving. The fire popped, casting shadows up the log walls. Colter, she said. I'm not sure I believe in second chances, but I think I believe in decent men. He didn't speak, just set the finished latch on the table and stood. You should sleep. We'll ride out early for firewood. North Slope's got good deadfall. She set down the coat. Thank you for not asking me to leave. I won't, he said. Unless you want to. She climbed the ladder that night, the quilt tucked under one arm and curled up beneath the low beams. Below, Colter stretched out beside the coals, arms crossed behind his head. The wind rose again, tapping the shutters. But the cabin held strong, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, Cassidy didn't feel like she was waiting to disappear. Cassidy stood at the edge of the creek, sleeves rolled, her hands raw from scrubbing. The cold water bit at her skin, but she welcomed the sting it gave her something certain to feel. A pair of deer crossed upstream, their hooves silent on the bank, and she watched them until they vanished into the trees. Behind her, Colter's axe rang out in a steady rhythm. Each strike echoed through the bare woods, sharp against the hush of late November. She wrung out the last shirt and laid it over a flat stone, then turned toward the sound. He stood among the stumps, sleeves pushed to his elbows, breath rising in pale clouds. His coat hung on a branch nearby, forgotten. She watched as he paused to wipe his brow with the back of his hand, his gaze drifting toward the ridge. Did you always want this? She asked, approaching slowly. A place of your own, far from everything. He rested the axe against a tree and stretched his shoulders. Wasn't about wanting. It was the only thing that didn't feel borrowed. She nodded, arms crossed. I used to dream about places like this. When I was younger, I'd draw cabins in the margins of my schoolbooks. One window, one chimney, always smoke coming from it. Colter looked at her, brow lifted slightly. You went to school. A little, she said. Long enough to read and do my sums. After my mother passed, I had to stop. My aunt said learning wasn't bred. He picked up a log and shouldered it. Funny. My father said the same thing. Thought books made a man soft. Did they? She asked. No, he said simply, but they made me quiet. He didn't like that much. Cassidy followed him back toward the cabin, carrying a smaller bundle of kindling. The sun was sinking low, casting gold along the snow, and the path felt worn enough now that she no longer stumbled. Inside, she hung the washed clothes near the stove while Colter stacked the wood. The warmth seeped through the room and she shed her shawl, folding it over the chair back. He handed her a tin of beans and a knife. Can you chop onion? She took it and began working, her hands steady. My father used to cook on Sundays, said it made the food taste better when you'd waited all week for it. What happened to him? Caught a fever one spring, she said. By nightfall he was gone. Colter didn't ask more. He stirred the pot and added salt, then stepped back as she slid in the onions. You've got away with quiet, she said, not looking up. Most men fill silence like they're afraid of it. I grew up in a house where noise meant trouble. She met his eyes. You never raised your voice, not once. Not even when the roof leaked or when I dropped that lantern. I saw the look on your face, he said. Didn't need to say anything. Cassidy turned back to the stove, but her thoughts stayed with him. There was something in his steadiness that made her feel as though she could breathe without bracing for the next blow. After supper, he brought out a wooden box she hadn't noticed before. Inside were small carved animals, bears, elk, a fox with its tail curled. You made these? She asked, picking up the fox. He nodded. Long winters, nothing better to do. She turned the carving over in her hands. They're careful, like you. He glanced at her, then back at the fire. You see things most folks don't." She held the fox a moment longer, then set it gently back in the box. "Tomorrow," he said, "I want to ride out toward the pass. There's a neighbor down the valley who keeps bees. He trades honey for jerky come winter." Cassidy leaned back, arms folded. "You sure he won't mind me coming along? You're part of the bargain," he said. "And besides, I'd rather not go alone." She studied the lines of his face in the firelight. "Do you ever think about what comes after this winter?" Colter took his time before answering. "I think about what it might feel like to build something that lasts." Cassidy turned her gaze toward the hearth. "So do I." The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't empty. The fire burned low, and outside the trees held still against the dark. They didn't speak again that night, but neither of them reached for the silence to fill it. Up in the loft, Cassidy lay beneath the quilt, her hands tucked beneath her chin. She didn't know what kind of life had begun to take shape between them, not yet. But it felt like standing at the edge of something wide and unbroken, waiting for the first thaw. The snow had turned to crust under the sun's weak touch, patches of brown grass showing through along the southern slope. Cassidy rode behind Colter, her borrowed mare sure-footed on the trail down toward the valley. The wind held a bite, but the sky was clear and wide, and the saddle beneath her felt less foreign than it had weeks ago. Colter led the way with an easy rhythm, his shoulders moving in time with the gelding beneath him. He glanced back once, long enough to make sure she was still with him, and said nothing. She liked that about him, that he didn't fill the morning with needless talk. They rode until the trees thinned and the land opened into a stretch of low hills and empty pasture. A narrow homestead came into view, tucked between two groves of cottonwoods. Smoke trailed from a crooked chimney, and a cluster of hives stood to the side, wrapped in burlap for warmth. A gray-haired man stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He squinted toward them, then raised a hand in greeting. "Colter Vaughn," he called. "Was wondering when I'd see you again." "And who's this?" "Cassidy Hollis," Colter said, dismounting. "She's staying on through the winter. Helps around the place." Cassidy climbed down, landing stiffly but upright. The older man offered her a nod and a weathered smile. "Lawrence Beale," he said. "Been keeping bees here for near 30 years. You ever tasted comb pulled fresh from the hive?" "I haven't," she said. "Well, you'll fix that while you're here." Inside the house, the walls bowed slightly inward with age, but the warmth was thick and sweet. Lawrence poured them each a mug of cider and laid out a wedge of honeycomb on a wooden plate. Cassidy bit into it, surprised by the way it melted across her tongue. "Never tasted honey like this," she said. Lawrence chuckled. "That's what bees do when you leave them be. No smoke, no sugar, no pressing." Colter handed over a wrapped bundle of jerky and a jar of lard, and Lawrence exchanged it for 2 heavy tins of honey. "Hard to believe how quick the years turned," Lawrence said, settling into a creaky chair. "You planning to stay, Miss Hollis?" Cassidy glanced at Colter, who was tying down the tins without looking up. "I haven't decided yet," she said carefully. Lawrence nodded like he understood something without her needing to say more. "Well, some places grow on you. Not quick like spring grass, but slow, like roots in dry ground." The ride home was quieter still, the sun dipping lower, dusting gold over the snow. They stopped once to water the horses at a stream still running beneath a skin of ice. Cassidy crouched beside Colter, cupping water to her lips. "You've never asked me to stay," she said, her voice low. Colter didn't turn. "Didn't want to make you feel beholden." "I wouldn't feel that," he straightened, wiping his hands dry on his coat. "I know." She stood, brushing off her skirt. "But I'd like to hear it anyway." He looked straight at her then. "I'd like you to stay, Cassidy, past winter, past spring, however long you want." She held his gaze. "Then I will." They didn't kiss, not there on the frozen bank. But something shifted between them, quiet and certain, like a gate swinging inward. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk was falling. Cassidy lit the lamp while Colter stabled the horses. She set out the honeycomb and cider, and when he stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, she poured 2 mugs without asking. He took one, their fingers brushing, and stood beside her at the table. "I saw Lawrence's wife's name carved into the doorframe," she said. "Died 5 years back," he answered. "He keeps the house just like she left it." Cassidy traced the rim of her mug. "Do you ever think about what kind of home this cabin could be? I've thought about it more lately than I ever did before." She turned to him, steady and unflinching. "I want to make a life here if you'll have me." "I've been hoping for that," he said, voice low. "Not just the help, you." Cassidy stepped closer. "Then come here, Colter Vaughn." This time when he kissed her, it wasn't cautious or uncertain, it was earned. His hands found her waist, hers rested against his chest, and they stood in the quiet warmth of the cabin. They'd both shaped with their hands and their days. They married before the last snow melt. Not in town, but beneath the cottonwoods near the creek, with Lawrence as witness and a single ribbon tying her hair. Colter carved their names into the cabin's doorframe beside the latch he'd made that first winter. Cassidy planted sage and sweet peas along the south wall. Colter built a rocker from pine and left it on the porch where she liked to sit at dusk. In the evenings, they read by lamplight or sat in silence, her head on his shoulder, his hand wrapped around hers. The loft became a nursery by the time the leaves turned gold, and the bees came back in spring to the wildflowers she scattered near the fence line. They didn't speak often about the past, not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer ruled them. What mattered was the shape of their days now. The firewood stacked high, the bread rising on the hearth, the way he reached for her hand without needing to be asked. And when the wind howled again through the pines, as it always did when the snow returned, Cassidy no longer feared the cold. She had built something lasting, a home, a love, a life, and Colter, steady as the land itself, had built it with her.